know who you are. At least they know the quadrilateral that bears your name. But when you came to faith, where you grew up, and some of your family story and how you became a historian.
Okay. I was born in 1949 in Nottingham in the English North Midlands. I went with my parents to a Brethren assembly, that's the so-called Plymouth Brethren, when I was young, and found its atmosphere intriguing, not least because of the silence. But then my parents moved to a Baptist church, a very conservative Baptist church, when I was 9. And a year later at that church, I was converted after a woman preacher's sermon. And of course, Brethren did not then at all approve of women preaching. So that was anomalous, but it was real. I knelt down at the side of my bed and prayed a prayer of commitment. And although I was only 10, I think it was real. I think it stuck. And although I've questioned it in retrospect, I think there has been a continuity of a sort of Christian experience ever since. So I was a Christian. I didn't become a member of my Baptist church, as I now think I jolly well should have done. I don't like separating conversion from baptism and church commitment. But I was baptized when I was 18, just before going to university. And that was a matter of serious reflection. And that was, as it were, a declaration of where I stood. And at university thereafter, I was very active in the Baptist Society, the Robert Hall Society at the University of Cambridge. The school that I had been to, Nottingham High School, was a superb school. It was what in England is called a public school, and therefore, of course, is a private school, a splendid paradox. It was totally independent of the state, but it had begun as the town grammar school in 1513, and therefore had free places for some people from the local state primary schools. So I got a free place, and I therefore had a marvellous education with quite excellent teachers, most of them. There were exceptions. There was the maths teacher against whose door desks were piled up every lesson, and we could hear them from the next door room. But that apart, almost all the teachers were really good, and they gave me a very good education, which made it quite natural for my friends and me to go on either to Oxford, 4 people went there, or Cambridge, 27 people went there, which was obviously a very sensible ratio. At that school, I had good history teachers, and I became more and more interested in history. I'd actually been interested in the subject even before I went to my high school. When I was 9 at my primary school, we had to do a project, and so my wise primary school teacher encouraged me to do something on ancient history. So I wrote a book called A History of the Ancient World with which is incorporated classical mythology in 4 volumes. And it was indeed 120 pages and has footnotes. So in a sense, I was already online to be a historian from primary school, but clearly the rather superior teaching at my high school helped enormously. So I went up to Cambridge to read history, and Cambridge history at that time was also extremely good. I was a very much appreciative beneficiary of lots of distinguished historians, some of them, I confess, more congenial than others. And it was natural, therefore, to go on to do a history PhD, which can be done straight away without a master's degree intervening in those days. I have to say, however, that the history was of a particular type. I was up at university as an undergraduate from 1968 to 1971, and that was the peak of the time, certainly in Britain, in some measure, I think, in the States too, when economic history was very much the vogue, and when Marxism was very much an influence, so that on the right wing, there were people who said that political events are determined by economics, and the Marxists said exactly the same thing, but they had a very different view of what the proper economic relationships were, and therefore how politics was determined. And so people were keen on influencing undergraduates towards economic determinism of various types, which marginalized ideas in general and religion in particular as influences. Geoffrey Elton, who was a very distinguished Tudor historian, came into a lecture on one occasion, said, we'll talk about the English Civil War today. And his line was, well, of course, we now know that religion had nothing to do with its origins. Well, that is a quite extraordinary statement by the standards of previous generations or subsequent generations. It is now recognized that religion was a major, possibly the major factor behind the English Civil War. But at that time, that was not so. Hence, this historian who was a Christian and wanted to explore the relationship between Christianity and history went off to the theology faculty and listened to very good lectures there on the history of ideas in relation to the Christian past. So I got a lot of my history, paradoxically, from theology, and the two naturally melded. Even before I went to university, I had been inspired to, guided towards, writing a history of the church where I'd been converted. And it was only 100 years old, in our terms trivial, of course. But it made me explore the past of a Baptist church in North Nottingham from the 1870s to the 1970s. And that made me do oral history, but also try to work out the relationship of that church to public affairs and therefore to mainstream politics. And so I decided that if I wanted to do a PhD and was able to, I should move on to the relationship between nonconformity, including Baptist, Congregationalists, and Methodists, very strong in the late 19th, early 20th century, and politics, because there was a big gap there. There was no published book in that field. So that's what I went to do my PhD on, the nonconformist conscience. That's how I became a historian.